So we're going to fly through Chapter 9, should be review. On the y-axis, we're always going to have dollars, our total cost or our total revenue. On the x-axis, we're going to have the quantity. And when we're talking about monopolies, we know that we have a downward sloping marginal revenue curve. Instead of being something that is a horizontal line, right, like we had before with perfect competition land, right, because there was a supply and demand that had some market price that was equal to the demand curve that was equal to the marginal revenue curve. We don't have that situation going on anymore. Now we have a marginal revenue curve that is downward sloping. So a marginal revenue curve that's downward sloping is really going to tell me two different things once I get the other half of the picture on here, right? So the other half of the picture is my marginal cost curve. So we know that our optimal allocation or profit maximizing rule is that our Q star is where our marginal revenue is greater than or equal to our marginal cost, right? We know that this is the case regardless of the market structure. And so we're going to find these two curves. We're going to say X marks the spot. We're going to drop an anchor to figure out the profit maximizing quantity. So I said this marginal revenue curve tells us two things. The first thing it tells us is the profit maximizing quantity. The second thing that it tells us has to do with this point right here. So this point right here equates to the maximum revenue that a monopoly firm can charge. And so since this is a marginal revenue graph, right, it's essentially telling me the derivative of my total revenue let's see here, my total revenue concave shape, right? So it's going to have an increasing slope, an increasing slope, an increasing slope, and then right where it goes past zero, the slope is going to stop being increasing, and then it's going to be negative. So this part here, so this splits it up into increasing revenue. Anywhere where the marginal revenue is above the 0, 0 axis, right? Anywhere it's positive, it's going to be increasing revenue, and anywhere it's negative over here, it's going to be decreasing revenue. So this point here, this is my revenue maximizing point. So it's not my Q star, but it is an important Q that has to do with maximizing something, but it's not maximizing my profit, it's maximizing my revenue. So anywhere that marginal revenue crosses the x-axis is going to tell us the total revenue maximizing quantity. Now, one of the things that we're going to get really tripped up at is when we're doing our profit maximizing and when we're figuring out, okay, Q star is where the marginal revenue equals the marginal cost. One of the things that we're going to constantly want to do is we're going to constantly want to go ahead and label this as the price, right? That is not correct. We never do that. And so the reason for that is that since we're not in perfect competition land anymore, since we have a marginal revenue that is significantly sloped, that means that instead of having a demand curve that is exactly the same as the marginal revenue, now we're going to have a demand curve that looks something like this. So the marginal revenue curve is always going to have a slope that's twice the demand curve. And so it's hard to see here, but you know, this has a slope pretty much of 1 for 1, whereas if we look at the demand curve, this has a slope of 1 for 2.
Oh, the point where revenue is maximized is also the point where we're productively efficient?
That's just an artifact of the way I drew it.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's not, yeah, so if this, which is not quite lined up to it, you know what I mean? But yeah, that's a good point. No, it's just the way that I drew it. So we're never going to go over here, right? Because why? Because we have a demand curve. We know what the actual amount is that people are willing to pay. So we're always going to first find that intersection, drop an anchor, right? Drop a little anchor down there to get our quantity star. And then we're going to go back up to the demand curve to find that price, right? Because why would we charge less than what the market is willing to pay? So this is going to be our P star up here. And then the last part of this situation, right, is talking about our average total costs. And the reason why we need our average total cost is so that we can figure out what the profit rectangle is. This is my average total cost at Q star. And so this whole thing is going to be my abnormal economic profits that monopolists get to enjoy. Question on this. Why and how the monopolist sets quantity and then sets price to maximize their profits. So in perfectly competitive land, right, abnormal economic profits were short-lived because of the free entry and exit and the free information. Well, now we're in monopoly, so there's high barriers to entry. There's no assumption about perfect information. So these monopolists can maintain these abnormal economic profits indefinitely. Questions on chapter 9? Important bits. Okay.